Good morning, Garland Nixon here, and we are fortunate enough to have Joti Brar. We've got lots to talk about. The imperialists are on the move, and we are on the mover. How's that? I just made up a word. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here. And that's the great thing about being one of the littles, of being the hoi polloi, the great unwashed. You can just make up words and stuff like that. You don't have to use the right fork and drink the right wine with seafood. You just make stuff up and enjoy life. I love it. We have with us now Joti Brar, a person who speaks for the little people. No, we're not really the little people. That's the big secret. We're the big people. We're the masses, and they're fooling us. And that's not going on much longer. Joti Brar, let's talk. Oh, first of all, Joti, where can people find you online?
So regular viewers will know that my preferred medium of social mediaing is Telegram. If you just search for my name, Joti Brar, in Telegram, you will find my channel there. If you also search for The Communists, you can see my party's website there, thecommunist.org. If you search in Telegram for The Communists, you will also find us. We are also on Twitter. But it's not my favorite way because, you know, all the shadow banging and algorithming, and you can follow us, but you'll probably never see anything we post. Of course, we're on Facebook, those other places. But, Proletarian TV. Again, it's very noticeable. There's a huge suppression of our channel. But if you specifically go and look for us, you will find us. Proletarian TV is where all our video content is.
Let's start here. Something that's been on my mind, so I'll just toss it at you. NATO had a communique, and in that communique, they said such things as we are bound by our commitment to democracy, rule of law, to and I love this one, that all countries in the world have a right to choose their own security arrangements. But they didn't say, with the exception of all countries in the Western Hemisphere, because the U.S. claims complete supremacy over the Western Hemisphere. Direct supremacy over the Western Hemisphere using what they call as the Monroe Doctrine. So, just an absolute blatant lie. Joe Biden comes on and does a speech last week, Wednesday, in which he says he's the first president to report that the United States is not at war anywhere in the world. Bibi Netanyahu comes on, and I don't even have to pick one thing out of his speech. There was not a word in that speech, that was true. Not the way he meant it. Several of them were true if you read them in the reverse. But the fact that I read that as desperation, when you have to just gaslight people and say exactly the opposite. You're saying to your citizens, all countries in the world have a right to choose their own security arrangements. Does that include Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua? Apparently, no. China? How about China? No. How about Russia? The security arrangements on their border. Russia said, hey, let's have indivisible security arrangements where nobody gets advantage of the other. Well, why do you have to surround me with bases? The blatant lies that now they're just out in the open. They used to try to hide it a little bit. Your thoughts on that, Joti?
So you're absolutely right that there's this massive multi-pronged campaign of gaslighting that goes on from the imperialists to the masses. I think what people maybe don't realize is that has actually been the case since the end of World War I, and particularly, especially since the end of World War II. What's happening now is increasingly the gaslighting isn't working. People have woken up to it. And once you've woke up to it, then it's really, really blatant, right? The machinery becomes very in your face. You're like, well, how can everyone not see this, how we're being lied to? And more people are looking around going, can't you see that this is just massive lies? Now, I think probably the question we have to ask ourselves is, why? What happened for the Western audiences, the working class people in the imperialist countries en masse, to stop believing in the lies of the ruling class, which at one point in time they used to swallow? Now, I think the root of it, you might find this a bit boring because I say these kind of things quite often. The root of it is the October Revolution. 1917 changed the world forever because a revolution happened which overturned European imperialist power. It replaced capitalist production for profit with socialist planned economy and performed miracles as a result. It put the working people in charge of running the country, and they did an amazingly brilliant job. And nobody was unemployed, and everybody had healthcare, and everybody had all the things the capitalists tell us are impossible. And they're always giving us reasons why it's impossible. And usually the reason it's impossible is it's our fault somehow. We have too many children. We don't work hard enough. We don't have the right mentality. We're not clever enough. You know, one reason or another. And anyway, these things are a bit complicated, and you wouldn't understand, love. Just run along, do your job, and STFU, right? Keep quiet. It's none of your business. But in the process of building the world's first socialist state, the Soviet Union also publicly solved a whole load of really important questions. It solved the problem of racism by settling the national liberation question. Within the Russian Empire, all the countries that had been oppressed by Russia were liberated, were given freedom, were given independence. They had the right to choose whether they were going to join the Soviet Union. Most of them did. One or two of them didn't, right? Finland didn't. And it was Stalin who went to Helsinki to sign the document that said, okay, Finland, you are now free, right? That's over. Our relationship is broken. You don't want to be in the Soviet Union. You don't, you know, that's your choice, right? But the national question was solved. And what happened in the Soviet period was, instead of the cosmopolitan center, i.e. Russia, sucking the wealth out of the colonies and leaving them backward and poor and telling its own people racist myths about why those people are backward and poor, what happened was extra funding went. They had disproportionate funding to help the periphery catch up and develop. And so what you had was this real flowering of the culture, the dignity, the literature, the customs, but also a development of the economy. Prosperity was brought to the people of all the parts of the empire. What tend to be lumped together as the stans, right? All those parts of Central Asia that were colonies of Russia then became socialist republics in the Soviet Union, with independent development, with a massive uplift in the situation of the people, their access to healthcare, education, jobs, etc., and progress. All of that didn't just happen to the people of the Soviet Union. It happened to the people of the world. What it did was change the mindset of the people of the world forever. It was no longer possible for the imperialists to do what they had done before then, which was just to say openly and blatantly, well, the black races are not really quite human yet. They're children. It's going to take 1,000 years before they're ready to rule themselves. In the meantime, we rule them for their own good. And it's how it has to be, because look at them. Look how backward they are. And they would say to their own workers, you know, it's natural that they're backward because, you know, black people are different to white people. And, you know, now empire was never about white or black, but racism is a very handy tool. The British ruling class used racism against the Irish and against Jews, you know, all of whom in Europe were white. But they promoted all kinds of myths to divide people and to justify their treatment of these colonized or oppressed groupings, right? So the imperialists used racism, and they created these divisions in people, and they made them believe that racism was natural and that humanity is somehow segregated into different groups which naturally have access to different things. It's something about how they are. It's not to do with the system. You know, all these, and of course, imperialism, capitalism as a class society perpetuated the oppression, the enslavement of women. Marxism shows that is an oppression which is connected to class society. And in the Soviet Union, the myth of women's inferiority and incapability intellectually and physically was totally busted open. It was ended for good, and all the bases for keeping women oppressed was systematically got rid of in law, but in terms of the facilities that were created to allow women to take their part in the workplace and in public life without the extra responsibility of all this kind of private work they're expected in capitalist society to do at home for the family, as a kind of, although it's actually a service for society, it's seen as a private affair of the family, that the woman, after she goes to work, also has to come home and do everything else, right? It's a very effective means of keeping women out of public life. But it's a, it's a social hangover from, long centuries and millennia of class society. So in all these different ways, sorry, it's a long, you got your usual long-winded answer from me. In all these different ways, what the Soviet Union showed the people of the world is these problems can be solved, and these justifications the imperialists have been giving us for the inevitability and the rightness of their system are lies. We can provide jobs for everybody. We can provide healthcare for everybody. Workers can run society without bosses, right? It is possible for the economy to serve the people without the enrichment of a special caste of people who live from the labor of others, who have riches and idleness while we work and have nothing, right? That is not inevitable. It's not the fate of humanity. It's a phase. It's a step along the way to where we need to get to. And they showed that socialism, that Marxism was true, that it could be put into practice, and what that did in particular, as well as opening the era of socialism, which is the era we still live in, Garland, right? Historically, the era of socialism was opened in 1917. And it will continue for as long as there are, revolutions still need to be had. For as long as there's capitalism and imperialism on the globe, we will continue to live in this era of transition from capitalism to socialism, right? Socialism is the next step in humanity's long journey, away from original tribal existence up to a higher plane of advanced communist existence. They showed that imperialism, that colonization is not inevitable. They showed that the imperialists are not this special superior beings who somehow have a God-given right to rule over the world. They showed that capitalism is not the end destiny of humanity. And in doing so, they forced the imperialists onto the back foot morally and ideologically. They had to start to hide their true intentions and their true meanings. They continued to think the same way and to talk the same way in private. But in public, they had to wrap up their same activities and programs of looting and suppression and domination and control and profit taking in the language that the people wanted, which is the language actually of socialism, the language of national liberation, of human rights, of everybody being equal, of nations being equal, of men and women being equal, of all people, no matter what their skin color, ethnicity, all of that being equal. This language they had to adopt in order to make their system look civilized. And now they talk about Western civilized values, but the veneer that they've put on their looting system is actually a kind of bastardized form of some of the outward semblance of the people's socialist demands, their national liberation consciousness, which came into the world in 1917, and then, of course, received a massive boost at the end of World War II. Why? Because World War II, in its essence, was a massive showdown between the camps of communism and the camp of imperialism in its most brutal, nakedly aggressive form, which was fascism, right? And in that great conflagration, the communists decisively won, not just because of, the revolutionary forces in China and the Red Army and Red forces in the USSR, but also because in every oppressed, colonized country that was occupied, whether it was occupied by Japan, Italy, Germany, or some other part of the Axis, it was the communists who led the resistance. And so the communists were the ones who emerged in 1945 as the heroes of the working class everywhere in the world. And although our movement has had a downturn historically, and we won't go into that now, but, the mindset that it brought to the people of national liberation, of a demand that their rights be respected, that they as human beings be taken into account, those just can't be got rid of. And so the system has had to be gaslighting us, essentially. So the real question is, why is the gaslighting no longer working? And I would suggest that the fundamental reason is because the capitalist system globally is now in such a deep economic crisis that the veneer is coming apart as they drive ever more desperately to war, and as they push down ever harder on the pay and conditions of working people in the West, who thought that they'd won all these post-World War II gains forever, and who are now finding that that was just a temporary bribe to keep them quiet, to keep them away from revolution. Now that bribe's basically being undone because the search for profitability means cannibalizing all the public services you created and turning them into a shell of themselves, and just a way for the government to give money to monopolies, not a way to deliver services to working people. So we have, on the one hand, privatization and cannibalization of public services in the interests of monopolies and against the interests of workers. And on the other hand, we have this acceleration of the process of export of capital. This, again, is a process that's been going on since the end of the 19th century, that the capitalists, in order to maximize profits in the capitalists from the Western countries, the first ones to have developed capitalist economies, they started exporting capital to set up production offshore, elsewhere, because it was cheaper, because that way you maximize your profits. But of course, what that means over time, this process has been going on and on and on, and now it's reached a point where our economies have become so parasitic. There are so few real productive jobs left. I mean, and I think Britain is probably the worst case of that, because we've been exporting capital for the longest, right? And it's so hard to find somebody in Britain who does a job which produces new wealth. And yet Britain is still in the list of the top, 7 or 8 countries of the richest in the world. Richest. Well, richest implies that new value is coming from somewhere. If we're not creating it, where does all this value come from? It literally comes through the square mile, the City of London, through the export of capital and the repatriation of the profits from that capital, i.e. sucking wealth out of the rest of the world. And we live in our service economies. We're living like parasites on the rest of the world, and we're not making the things we need ourselves. But as this process is continuing and accelerating, as the crisis is deepening, the shenanigans of our ruling class, the true nature of the system, becomes revealed to more and more people, because the comfortable conditions they had, which made them accept the narratives they were given, are being steadily undermined and taken away. And then people are much less likely to just buy into what they're told. Then we've had this process of war after war after war. And with each war, again, the era of national liberation, the wars don't succeed. And in the process of fighting an unsuccessful war and trying to hold down a rebellious population and to maintain unpopular occupations, what happens? The ruling class starts fighting amongst itself because its project isn't going well. Leaks start to happen. Information gets out. Why is Julian Assange targeted? Because he enabled information that was leaked during some of those unwinnable, unpopular wars and occupations to come into the public domain in such a way that masses of people saw it. Masses of people started to have their eyes opened to how undemocratic, anti-human, criminal, in fact, the system is that we live under, and how the politicians that are supposed to, we are told, represent us, in fact, are only acting on behalf of monopolies. So that was a very long-winded way of answering your question, but I hope it touched on some things that were relevant.
Well, I have to listen to it again because I was inspired. I was actually inspired by that of some things I'll be saying in upcoming interviews. So that was really good. I wanted to ask you about World War II to today. To me, the capitalists, in a way, in the U.S. saw World War II as kind of the Windows Control Alt Delete, right? A reset, right? A complete reset. And so they started, interesting in the US. They started building, expanding the industry expanded, jobs expanded, all of these for the masses, certainly not some segments of the masses that were held down. Great jobs and retirement and good pay and you name it, right? It was a paradise. Granted, the money was coming from somewhere, but we don't have to talk about that right now. But here's what's interesting. You could kind of actually draw like a graph, where the standard of living in World War II up, 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 up in the US, right? More factories are being built, more jobs, unions are getting stronger, the pay is getting better, the cost of living is going down, and it's up, 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 right? So that's 45, 55, 65, 75, say 35 years into say 70, 75. I could argue that the Vietnam War was so expensive. That's when we came off the gold standard. A lot of bad things happened economically as a result of that. Again, as imperialist wars. But around 80, 75 to 80, neoliberalism hits, straight back down again, right? So the imperialists, really, they kind of had it good. You know what I mean? And the people had it good in a way. I mean, we can talk about how they were getting the money overseas, but everything's going well. The people are happy. The people are buying into the system in the US. The people got jobs, new cars, blah, blah, blah. Things are looking good. And the imperialists capitalism starts to transform 75 or 80 into full neoliberalism. And then what they were doing overseas, stealing all the resources, as I always say, Americans think they're on a luxury liner, they're on a pirate ship, the Jolly Roger. That turns around home. And the things that they're doing in Africa and Latin America, they now start to cannibalize, like a person who's starving and their body starts eating their own muscles to survive. And it turns around and it's downhill, downhill, downhill. And you can see that for the people, for everyone, up, 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 up. As it starts to go down, the standard of living for the working class goes down. But all of that money and profit starts going into the hands of fewer and fewer and fewer. Your thoughts on that dynamic from World War II to now? I could call it the transformation of capitalism. We could call it the natural course of capitalism. But now we sit where we are now they've got a disaster on their hands, and they're trying everything they can to address it, but there's no answer. Anyway, your thoughts on what I was just asking about?
Definitely. We talked before about the reasons why working class lives in the imperialist countries after World War II got significantly better in every respect. And essentially there was a peace deal done to stop them going to revolution. Revolution was very popular across Europe. Socialism, communism, those demands were the demands of the mass of the people in most of the world at the end of World War II. The Soviet Union had shown it could be done very successfully. They had been a model example of how you build an economy without exploitation that lifts all the people up and leaves nobody behind. And it was a really, the socialist example was so phenomenal. And then their incredible achievements, of the USSR in particular, of defeating the Hitlerite fascists and the whole of the Axis alliance, again, the prestige in which the Soviet Union and its system was held were phenomenal. In order to restabilize the imperialist system after that, the USA came in and basically bailed out the Western imperialists and helped them to re-establish control over their colonies, to have that income source to help to fund social programs that bought off the revolutionary sentiments of the masses. Said, no, you don't need a revolution. You can have all the things you want without a revolution. Look, we're civilized now. Look, here we are being civilized. And we've talked before about don't ask where some of the money for this is coming from, because of course what it meant was pushing down harder on the colonized people, stopping their drive for national liberation. Horrific crimes committed, I know in particular, of course, about the British, in Malaysia, in Kenya, in India, horrific crimes committed by them to stop national liberation struggles or subvert them or try to keep up the flow of loot and tribute from their colonies. The USA is a particularly, it's the one example that bucked the trend in terms of at World War I, it was a new imperialist power, not an old one. And it wasn't where all the fighting was happening. It stayed out of the fighting and was enriching itself from both sides and developing its industry very fast as a result during that process. During World War II, it's essentially a very similar pattern where, the fighting was not on US territory. No US town got bombed apart from Pearl Harbor. I know the US thinks that's a big deal, but really, in the scale of World War II, not a big deal. But the USA was able to develop, rapidly expand, in fact, as you said, its industry during World War II, feeding armaments initially probably to both sides, and then, later on just to its allies, but on, particular lend-lease and all these various, loans. And, they were making a killing out of the war, essentially. But also after the war, they emerged as the only imperialist power that was really strong and stable. And what that meant was they kind of bankrolled the other imperialists just enough to stop them going under, but not enough to let them come back and be rivals again to the USA. The USA maintained its dominant position by means of loans and also by just out-competing. It was very supportive of the national liberation movements from the French colonies, from the British colonies, etc., because it understood that if there was going to be competition for access to the markets in those colonized countries, it could beat Britain and France. Imperialism prefers direct colonization because when you have a direct colony, you have total monopoly of that country's market. You don't have to compete with anybody else to take the raw materials out or to sell finished goods into the marketplace there. It's just yours. And of course, it's actually the reason why British imperialism ended up with a competitive disadvantage, because they stopped updating their old industrial machinery in Britain for a long time. We had still Victorian machines after World War II, because when you physically control a whole load of market, why would you improve your technique? It costs a lot of money to re-equip factories. If you don't need to do that to keep making a profit, why would you? People imagine that imperialism and capitalism is all about the drive for new technology. They only want new technologies where they need it to beat a rival. But if you've set yourself up in such a way where you don't have to have a rival, then in fact even progress becomes like something that you don't really have an interest in. It's just getting in the way of you just taking money. USA had a competitive advantage, of course, the size of its economy, but also just the fact that it had survived unscathed from the wars, and it could outcompete the old imperialist powers in all their colonies if they were liberated officially from occupation. So you saw this process going on in World War II, and that was very much part of what was fueling the big boom, and that America was the country as far as the West was concerned after World War II. Everybody looked at America and said, wow, look at their amazing standard of living, look at everything they've got, look at everything they're doing, everything they make. They dominated the world, in steel production and, wheat exports and all these types of things, important things for a real economy, right? They had a very real economy. But of course, the post-war boom came to an end eventually. Europe got rebuilt. And what did that mean? That meant economic crisis reasserting itself, just as it had after World War I, and which led to the Great Depression, which is, still has a great historical, scar on the folk memory of the people of Britain, of the USA, of France, what a period that was for working people. That dynamic was starting to reassert itself. And Vietnam coincided with the re-onset of crisis in terms of, the mid-1970s, essentially. You're starting to see global overproduction crisis. And we've talked, what are the responses to overproduction crisis for the imperialists? Markets are glutted. You've got a problem with making profits from productive activity. What can you do? Number one, you drive to war to conquer territory and loot resources and generate profit that way. Number two, all those public services you've been delivering to working people, or all the concessions you've made to them, which essentially are taking a cut of your profits and giving them to workers. That's the way you see it as a capitalist. What it actually, I mean, it's not really your profit, is it? But that's, as a capitalist, that's how you see it. The wealth that's being generated by workers is split between what's given to workers in their wages and what goes to the employers in profits. And so that includes social wages, infrastructure, anything you're paying to make life better for the general population. You can put it into wages, right? It might go through taxation, the social wage is part of our wages, right? It's not just what you get in your pocket. It's, well, what do you have to pay for your healthcare or not? What is provided to you, for free in terms of education, healthcare, pensions, holidays, whatever it might be, decent roads, blah, blah, parks, culture, leisure activities. All these things cost money to maintain. They're all concessions to the masses, to their right to have a decent life. All of these were concessions actually to the socialist mindset of the masses that they're being given. All of them become targeted when there's a crisis of profitability. The capitalists say, well, but there's money to be made out of that. Why are we spending money on something that doesn't generate a profit for anybody? All of these services are steadily transformed into business units, ways to make money. Some things are just directly privatized, other things it's a bit by the back door. But as you say, there's a general steady process of cannibalization, and there's this steady process of export of capital because workers elsewhere are cheaper and therefore profits will be higher. Fundamentally, that's why capital is exported. A capitalist is not in the business of charity. He's in the business of growing his capital. He's in the business of making maximum profit. A little bit of profit won't do, because just think about it this way, Garland. You've got three companies. I'll say there's three banks in front of you, and one offers you 2% interest, and one offers you 5% interest, and one offers you 20% interest. Where are you going to put your money? So the one that's doing 2% interest is going to go under because no one wants to put their money there, right? That's the reality of capitalism. If a capitalist doesn't chase maximum profit, he will go out of business because someone else is doing it. That's the logic of capital. And when the profits are high enough, there is no crime they won't commit, in order to try to secure them, right? So we have this crisis of profitability coming back, as you've identified it, into the 70s, basically the end of the post-war boom, the end of the Reconstruction period. And we have seen the decline in working class living standards since then. We've seen the accelerated pace of offshoring of all industries. It's not like industry no longer happens. Everything is still being made, right? We still using things and needing things every single day. We have to eat things. We have to wear things. We have to use things. These things. Everything has to be made. It is being made somewhere by someone. Right? There are proletarians in factories all over the world making the stuff we're using. It's just that you can't see the factory anymore, or the person who works in that factory anymore, because, such a huge proportion of it now is happening overseas. And it's creating a situation where the people who used to work in those kind of jobs have been left high and dry, because it's not like, again, the capitalists don't come along and say, oh, well, since this type of work is now obsolete or has been offshored, well, what we're going to do is find some other useful work for everybody to do and make sure you've all got employment and benefits. And no, of course they don't. They just leave communities to rot. And we're now in a situation where we've had decades for some communities where they have been left for several generations now to rot in a post-industrial, what seems to them a post-industrial world, with no jobs, no opportunities. You can go and work in a shop or in a restaurant or a pub or a hotel, in some kind of a service job, or you can hope to move away from where your family are and find some either service sector, or maybe you'll be lucky and get into finance. What are the things that our countries still do, right? Maybe there's a few jobs in arms manufacture. There's a lot of work in finance and things that are connected to finance. There's a lot of work in logistics. There's work in and there's work in the service sector. These are the big employers, in retail. But the jobs of making things, the meaningful, socially useful jobs, the biggest socially useful occupations now in our countries are like healthcare and education, right? But even those are being turned into businesses. Increasingly, the people who work there are extremely exploited and feel less and less that they're able to deliver a meaningfully socially useful service, because all their hospitals, clinics have been turned into business units where the guiding motivation is not taking care of the people, but making money. So you why? Did I answer the question? Sorry.
Yes. And something dawned on me, a couple of things, and that is, I think the two things that the first two things that we've talked about are connecting. And I'll go back to my, again, my career in law enforcement. Two things go together: committing crimes and hiding crimes. If you commit crimes, you have to hide crimes because they're crimes, and you'll be in trouble if you commit them. You won't be able to continue to. So what you brought out is this: it's necessary for them to continue their exploitation as dynamics change. They've got to go to countries and steal their stuff. Well, let's say that country gets independence, that country fights back, they can't steal their stuff. Right? They need to go to other countries, do other things, steal other stuff. Well, that's closing down. They need to come home and steal it from their own people. They need to now exploit, they need to start cannibalizing, etc. But what is necessary to do that? You have to lie to the people and tell them you're going overseas to do this for good reasons, for democracy and to stop authoritarianism, blah, 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 right? But as the desperation grows, the lies grow. And the harder it gets to hide. And now I guess what this is going back to answering my first question. These blatant lies are because the level of desperation is growing. It's getting more obvious to the people because they're hurting more. As the system goes down, as that line on that graph goes down, which includes the standard of living for people, the happiness level, the expectations for the future, all of these things start to decrease. The people start asking questions they weren't asking before. They start getting onto your lies become more blatant, and the people start pushing back. So I think the dynamic of me asking, my God, the lies are obvious now. I've never seen anything like it. It's no, they're not, they've always been obvious. You just couldn't see them. Ask yourself now why you could see them. And now I think we've answered the question. Why can people see them? Because they're cannibalized, because what they were doing to Ghana, they're now doing to Indiana. And now Ghana could see it before. You know what I mean? Bolivia, Peru could see it before because they had a gun to their head and the trigger was being pulled every day and their stuff was being done. And now that they're doing it to you, it's as obvious to you as it was to the people that were being robbed before. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think you're pinpointing something really important, which is the shift in our material conditions, which impacts what we see and what we understand about what's going on around us. Our motivations for trusting in the system and allowing it to be criminal elsewhere are being massively undermined by the fact that, we're not getting the kickback we used to get to keep our blinkers in place and to make us feel comfortable in the lies that we were told. I think, you talked about committing crimes means you have to hide crimes because it's a crime. I don't think the imperialists think of themselves as criminal. I think that they simply understand that the masses believe imperialism is criminal. And therefore, the masses have to be given fairy stories and narrative control because the open truth, we despise all of you, is not going to go down, right? It's no longer okay. They can't get away with that. Their system is in decline. Its future is in the past. Its real support base is almost non-existent, actually. In reality, this is why Chairman Mao talked about, and back in the 50s, talked about imperialism being a paper tiger. So it looks like it's strong. And okay, you can't defeat it all in one go. But in reality, even the people in its own countries don't respect the system, don't like it, don't like the leaders. It doesn't have a good connection with its own people, never mind all the masses around the world who really, really hate it for how it treats them. Imperialism is showing us again its true face, which we should remember. It was like this before World War II. It was the fact that before the peace deal of the Keynesian consensus, before the welfare states were set up after 1945, the mass of workers, even in the richest imperialist countries, were in absolute poverty. There was the standard condition of imperialism is what Lenin identified in his book on imperialism in 1916, was that it bribes a small section, but a very significant section of the working class with better conditions. And in particular, it bribes, it makes sure that the leaders of the working class movement are in this bribed layer. And that's how it controls the anger of the masses, that the trade unionists and the Labour Party leaders and all this type of thing, they're in the bribed upper section. And actually, it makes them loyal to the system. They get privileges from the system. They're getting a nice life from the system. But the mass of the poor workers are not getting those privileges. That was the standard setup of imperialism right up until the end of World War II, when it kind of flipped its script a little bit. But now it's undoing all of that. And we're once again getting to that point where the mass of the workers are seeing how the ruling class really thinks about them. Actually, it thinks about them, as you said, the same way it thinks about the masses in the rest of the world. It doesn't believe, the ruling class doesn't feel a kinship to the poor of its own country whatsoever. It tries to tie us to them. That's why it uses, culture wars and racist rhetoric to try to make poor workers identify with their exploiters and oppressors. But the truth is, they see us the same way they see the people of the colonies, as totally expendable, exploitable, non-human, idiot, backward, whatever you want to call it, unfit for civilized existence. They consider the poor of their own countries exactly the same that they consider the masses in the colonies. And now they're showing it to us, It is becoming harder because of the crisis, because of the ways that they have to behave in order to try to save their system, because of the change in our material conditions. It's becoming harder and harder to hide the true face of the system, and written some notes to myself that I absolutely cannot read. I think not only does the system in crisis, and let's not forget that this is a system that was ripe for overthrow historically 100 years ago. The Bolsheviks successfully used this exactly same type of crisis in 1917 to overthrow an imperialist state. And the system as a whole was ready for that. You think 100 years later, all those processes have been continuing, right? The rottenness of this system is like 100 times more so than it was then. And it was already rotten, ready for overthrow, decaying in front of our eyes and becoming totally parasitic. Now, the level of parasitism is so exposed. Like I said, you look at Britain and it's, try and find somebody who does a job that produces any value, right? The parasitism is really exposed, the elitism, the humongous gap between the owners of capital and the masses in terms of, it's so big, it's impossible to get your head around. And the massive concentration of capital, if concentration of capital was far advanced in 1917, look at it today. Right? When, Oxfam seem to have given up doing their yearly reports where they said how many people have the same amount of wealth as half the world's poorest population, because it's getting embarrassing. Like it was like 10 one year, it was 11 one year, and then it was 9, then it was 8, and then they stopped reporting the statistic the same way. And I'm sure someone leaned on them and said, this is like, can you just change the way you present this information, please? Because this is getting a bit embarrassing. But so, this information, even people who support the system will say, it's a bit embarrassing, shouldn't we do something? Is this not becoming a little bit absurd, a little bit too blatantly unfair? People won't wear it forever. You remember we talked before about the guy who wrote that article on the pitchforks are coming. Like if we're so blatant about, rinsing the poor day after day after day and lording it over them with our 3 yachts and all the rest of it while they are sinking, they're not going to accept it forever. They won't let us sit and make profits out of them while while the gap gets so much and so blatantly bigger and bigger, and we are cannibalizing, as you said, all of their things that make their lives livable. So that the shift in people's material conditions, I think, and the experiences we've had in the last 30 years mean that on the one hand, the system in decay cannot get good front people, can't find talented, good actors to front up for them, who can convincingly portray it as something civilized and well-meaning. On the other hand, even if I had the best actors available, wouldn't we have become disposed not to trust the people the system puts in front of us? So you've got both, from both directions, you've got this kind of crisis in legitimacy. On the one hand, our experience has taught us not to trust these people. They keep lying to us, and they keep being exposed as lying to us. And our life conditions keep getting worse. So it's all very well for someone to stand up in front of you and say, we're here for human rights and democracy, and everyone has the right to a good life. But I'm living my life. And I know it keeps getting worse. And I know that when I go to the shops every month, my pay packet buys fewer things. And I can't keep up with how much things cost anymore. If I go to buy something I haven't bought in a few years, I'm totally shocked. And I can't tell if the price I'm being given really is the price, or if someone's taking the mick with me, right? Because inflation's going so crazy. And that's the real condition of my real and actual life. And no amount of someone standing in front of me saying, we're civilized and everything we do is for you, will make me believe them when that's the reality I'm living in. And when every attempt to redress that balance is met with repression, suppression, and an absolute brick wall that says, no, there's nothing you can do. You just have to tighten your belt and put up with it. So on the one hand, they can't get good people to front for them because their system is in such decay. And on the other hand, because of the decay and what that's done to our lived experience, then we're not disposed to trust the people they put in front of us. So from both directions, you see this crisis developing.
Lastly, the U.S. The unraveling of because the U.S. is clearly the king of this capitalist system right now. Okay, the leaders, they're in deep and serious crisis politically. So they put Joe Biden out there. Clearly, no one, you can see that this guy is not real. That he's barely a decent hand puppet anymore. It's like somebody holding up a hand puppet and like the hat and the face fall off, and now you can see the fingers, and it doesn't even look like a puppet anymore. And you're trying to put the hand back on and all, but no, it's just a hand puppet, right? So they're like, okay, we can't hide this hand puppet. Get Kamala Harris. And now we've got a woman of color of whatever. Right now, it seems to me with Kamala Harris this. You're not going to materially get anything that will improve your life. So we'll give you something, a symbol, right? A woman of color. What does she symbolizes? Fairness. She symbolizes women's advancement. She symbolizes the advancement of people of color. She symbolizes all of these things. So we will give you the symbol of all of these things that you're not going to get. No, sorry, you can't get them. You'll get them something. You can get something that appears, a picture of them that you can look at and say, I wish I had it. Kind of looks like I got it. But instead, I'm going to get the same thing I always got. Your thoughts of the desperation of the imperialists to just put forward this symbol, this hollow with Kamala Harris. We've seen her. When Kamala Harris ran in 2020, she was an abysmal candidate. Abysmal. The more people saw her, the less they liked her. Absolutely horrific candidate, right? And now it's, well, you can't say anything about Kamala Harris. Why? Because you're a racist, sexist, blah, 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 right? But all they've got left is Kamala Harris, a symbol of something that is a fake, a fraud. The desperation of this, going from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris. Anyway, and look around. What are they replacing? Going from Sunak, hand puppet, to Starmer, Sir Keir Starmer, hand puppet. Anyway, your thoughts on this business of replacing their hand puppets and what it's gone to now in the U.S., where they're using, the symbolism of a woman of color. Your thoughts?
Woman of color, my least favorite phrase. The political crisis is a reflection of the economic crisis, right? The economic crisis is leading to a political crisis on the one hand, because there's this as we said before, the whole system is losing credibility in the eyes of the masses. And on the other hand, because the ruling class are fighting amongst themselves, they're fighting for their survival. In an economic crisis, many capitalists will go bust, will get swallowed up by other capital. So to stay one of the movers and shakers, you've got to be utterly ruthless. And they want the USA as a whole to stay on top in the world. They want, within the USA, they want to retain their position in the hierarchy. They want to retain their ability to continue to exploit and expand their capital. And there's a crisis, and that means there's a fight. And there's a fight about how is best for US imperialism to try to survive this crisis, what it should be doing. Is it protectionism? Is it war abroad? Now, this is not a fight that fundamentally concerns us in the sense that there is no answer to imperialist crisis that in any way benefits the working class. Any way the imperialists find to continue their system means the blood and the suffering of the mass of the people at home and abroad. There's no way out of that. While the system remains in place, we pay the price for their profiteering. And the price is in blood, So we can see what they're fighting over. We can see why they're fighting. All of this, to me, it's an incentive, it's a motivation to study for the real solutions. Because the imperialists are looking for fake solutions. They want to keep their system, which is historically a dead end, has nowhere to take humanity. They want to keep it in place and stay as the lords of the world. That's their aim. In all of their fighting, that's what they're fighting over. Who gets to be one of the lords of the world? And can we maintain the system of lording it over the world? Can we maintain America's place as the lords of the world and the general system of imperialist domination so that America can have a place in that, right? All of that, that's the concerns of the ruling class. That's all, no matter how they dress it up, that's what they're fighting over. So when you understand that, the cannon fodder and the exploitation fodder, the source of wealth extraction and the boots to, the people to fill the boots in the army, that's what we are. That's what the workers are, right? We are not going to enjoy the spoils of victory if these people get to have a victory and get to keep their system going for a bit longer. We get to give our lives in blood and toil so they can continue lording it over the world and holding humanity back. So when you understand that, then you understand two things. Number one, you've got to study so you understand properly what is capitalism, what is imperialism, and you can see through all the ways in which they try to manipulate you into picking a side. Pick one of the sides of the ruling class. No, don't pick one of the sides of the ruling class. They're all against you, right? But how can we make use of the fights they're having amongst themselves in order to deepen the political crisis? That's something we need to work harder at doing. We need to deepen the political crisis because that is part of creating the conditions in which the masses begin to move and make. It's the masses who make history. It's actually not the rulers of the world. Whenever they make a big revolution, they have to mobilize the masses. It is the mass of the people who make history. And the next bit of history they're going to make is sweeping away these parasites and vultures and, vampires altogether so that they can finally be free to live, to build a decent life of prosperity and true equality. And as you say, this kind of faking of equality to put in front of us, here's a woman of color who is also our puppet, who we have got materials on to make sure she stays in line, and we've fed her the line she's going to say. And even, Kamala Harris would be great if she never opened her mouth, right? You just put her in front. She doesn't have Obama's skill level of, making a speech convincingly. But then we've learned a lot since Obama, haven't we? In general, as people. I mean, I was one of the few people I know who wasn't excited about Obama being elected because I didn't think it was going to change anything. But lots and lots of people got swept away with this idea. What were the two empty words he said to everybody for you? Hope, change. And it was like, I want hope, I want change. And they ran after him and, and hoped. What did they hope for? They hoped for change. What did they get? They got more of the same, only on steroids, accelerated, and the press not reporting on it because Obama's, the ruling class's guy, right? And the media was behind him, and so they gave him the Nobel Peace Prize while he was waging war on everybody, and we all went, "Oh yeah, great, he got a Nobel Peace Prize." What? But now you can look back and say, did the position of Black workers in the USA get better because Barack Obama was elected? No, in fact, it's got worse. Did the position of any minority get better? No. Position of women? No. Did the position of immigrants get better? No, it got worse. Did the position of countries abroad we waged war on get better? No, it got worse, right? Did inequality lessen? No, it got deeper. So we've had some experience now of this, having some token Black person put in front of us. And okay, because, now America's going to have a woman. And that'll be amazing, and that's historic. But we kind of know now, don't we, that that's BS. We've seen Hillary Clinton, we've seen Madeleine Albright, we've seen the crazy old lady in the Congress.
Oh, there's so many of them. Every one of them.
Yeah, scary woman. The scary
Nancy Pelosi.
It's not like the bourgeoisie doesn't have some prominent women in big places for us to see how beneficial that really is or isn't for our society. Does it bring a more caring face to the system? I don't think so, right? This is an inhuman system, and it dehumanizes not only its victims, but all the people who represent it too, become a kind of parody of humanity, and utterly ruthless and uncaring in their selfish, aims. They are bribed people, and we know that. We do know that. I'm not of the view that too many people are going to be swept along by the idea of Kamala Harris in the way that they were swept along by the idea of Barack Obama. It's not that time. All it reminds us is we have to stop believing the ruling class's lies about their system. Bourgeois democracy is democracy for the capitalist monopolist ruling class. A tiny handful of people actually have a say, a democratic say in how things are done. It's dictatorship over the rest of us. We need to study, we need to organize in our own interests, with our own program, completely separately to this whole charade. We need to stop allowing ourselves to be fodder for the endless circus of election politics. It's all a massive distraction. At the best, all it tells you is what some of the things the ruling class are fighting about amongst themselves. But that is information that's only useful to you if you have the context of waging a class struggle to put it into. Otherwise, it's just, infotainment, and you're sat there passively receiving it and saying, well, it seems to me, the ruling class would prefer to have Kamala Harris to Donald Trump, so I'll vote for Trump. Well, it's like, that can only take you so far, can't it? Because Donald Trump is also part of the system. So in the sense that a Trump presidency looks like it would be a bit help to deepen the crisis in the ruling class, looks like it might do. It's hard to tell exactly. There seems to be a lot of people are very upset about the prospect of it. Let's put it that way. So you think, well, okay, that's good if their crisis gets deepened, but it's only good if we're doing something about that. If we're just sitting there thinking, oh, now I elected Donald Trump, he's going to bring down imperialism for me. Well, no, he isn't. You've got to do that, right? We've got to stop waiting for the flipping savior to come, and through the ballot box as well. When you know that you have to have billions and in your chest, in your war chest, to fight and win a US presidential election, how can the savior of the working class come through the ballot box? Like, just put those two things next to each other. It's perfectly clear they can't, right? We have to organize ourselves. There's no way around it. To get the changes, we need to get the life for the masses, to get this bloodthirsty system off our backs. We have to organize.
Joti Brar, where can everybody find your info again?
So my party's website is thecommunists.org. You can find me on Telegram, Joti Brar. My party is also on Telegram, The Communists on Telegram. And we have a YouTube channel, Proletarian TV, which is also, I think, mirrored on Odyssey and Rumble, and we have a SoundCloud. You can find a lot of our stuff on various podcasty apps also.
All right. Thank you very much. Certainly appreciate it. Everyone follow Joti Brar. Follow her on her Telegram channel, and most especially. And thank you very much. Make sure you share this on all your social media platforms. These are really great discussions. I learn a lot from these, and they, inspire me when I go on other platforms. I've got to do a number of other interviews today, and I'm looking forward to utilizing some of this information for those particular interviews. So thank you very much, Joti. Everyone, don't forget, share it, particularly on like X and Facebook and platforms like that, where, they're going to oftentimes they're going to use algorithms to suppress people like Joti and I, or simply just throw us off the platform. A lot of you out there will get the numbers by, there's 305 people, a low number right now, but we know that this number is going to metastasize into many, many thousands. Certainly, we usually get no less than 10 to 15,000 views. So it would be great right there. We'd have 10 to 15,000 people who are sharing this on social media platforms. That can make a difference. Thank you very much, everyone. We're out.